The chamber was cold. Not in temperature, but in the way that powerful rooms always felt cold. Like warmth had never been welcome there, and never would be. Ambassador Choi Hai-jin stood at the center of the Galactic Council's main floor. She was a small woman by any standard, short dark hair, a pressed black uniform with Earth's flag stitched on the left shoulder. She held a datapad in one hand and kept her chin level, though every instinct told her to look down. Around her, the chamber curved upward in a massive half circle. Hundreds of seats filled the tiers above, occupied by representatives from 63 species. Some had 4 arms. Some had eyes that glowed in the low light. Some floated in fluid-filled pods because the atmospheric mix was wrong for their biology. They were all different, but right now, they all wore the same expression: contempt. High Counselor Vethrak sat at the center of the raised platform at the front of the chamber. He was tall, nearly 3 meters, with thick gray-green scales and small yellow eyes that never blinked. His species, the Draknar, had been a part of the council for over 4,000 years. He had led it for 200 of those. He was the oldest living political figure in the known galaxy. He looked at Ambassador Choi the way a man looks at an insect that has wandered onto his dinner table. "Ambassador," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber's translation system in smooth practice standard. "You have been given the floor for 3 minutes. Use them." 3 minutes. The standard time slot given to non-member observers. Humanity had been attending these sessions for 12 years. It had never been given a seat. It had never been invited. It simply showed up, was acknowledged for 3 minutes, and then was ignored. Choi stepped forward. "Honored Council," she said. Her voice was steady. She had trained herself to keep it steady. "I am here to formally protest the recent actions taken against human colonial settlements in the Kepler 442 system. 3 mining colonies were blockaded without notice. Supply ships were turned away. Over 40,000 civilians have been without medical resupply for 9 weeks. She paused. No one reacted. "We are requesting that the blockade be lifted immediately and that the Council issue a formal explanation for." "Ambassador." Vethrak raised one long-fingered hand. "You are aware that the Kepler 442 system falls within the designated expansion boundary of the Velhari Collective. With respect, High Counselor, humanity was operating in that system before the boundary was declared. Our settlements predate the designation by. The designation was issued 7 months ago by this council," Vethrak said. "Unanimously, you were notified. We were notified and we objected. The notification period was 48 hours. We asked for an extension to review the territorial mapping and your objection was noted." He said it like it meant nothing. Like noting it was the same as throwing it away. Choi pressed on. "Those are civilian settlements. Families, children. We are not asking for a change in territorial status at this time. We are only asking that the blockade be suspended on humanitarian grounds until." Fleet Commander Zoethal leaned forward from his seat to Vethrak's right. The Velhari commander was tall and thin, with 6 limbs and a body that seemed built entirely out of angles. His mandibles clicked softly before the translation system smoothed his words. "The blockade was issued to enforce council law. Human settlements in that region are in violation of territorial law. The appropriate response is not for the council to suspend enforcement. The appropriate response is for humanity to withdraw its settlements." The chamber murmured in agreement. Choi felt her jaw tighten. 40,000 civilians cannot simply be. They can be relocated, Zoethal said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Your species has ships. Relocate them." "In 9 weeks? Without supplies? Some of those people are." "Ambassador." Vethrak's voice dropped slightly, which somehow made it more intimidating. "Your 3 minutes are nearly elapsed. I suggest you use the remaining time to acknowledge the Council's final directive." Choi blinked. "Final directive?" Vethrak reached forward and touched a panel on his desk. A document appeared on the main display behind him, large enough for the whole chamber to see. "This directive was approved by the Council this morning, before this session began. It outlines humanity's required compliance schedule. You have 60 days to begin withdrawing all settlements from 17 designated systems. In those same 60 days, you are required to submit your military force inventory for review. The Council will determine what level of defensive capability is appropriate for a species of your classification." The chamber went still, not because of shock, but because they were all waiting to see what she would do. Choi stared at the document. Her eyes moved across it quickly. 17 systems, 42 settlements, over 200,000 people, and a demand that Earth hand over its military records, that it submit to a force cap determined by the Council. Her hands did not shake. She would not allow them to. "This directive," she said quietly, "was not shared with us in advance of this session. It did not require your advance consent, Vethrak replied. It is a directive, not a negotiation. You are telling us to abandon 200,000 Haidopable. We are telling you to relocate non-compliant populations from territories that do not belong to your species. And if we don't comply? There was a brief pause. Zoethal answered before Vethrak could. Then the council will authorize a pacification operation to enforce compliance. He let the word sit there. Pacification. A clean word for a terrible thing. Your species has no standing military force of note. You have patrol ships. You have some armed freighters. You have a handful of outdated defense platforms around your home system. A pacification operation would be brief. Choi said nothing for a long moment. Then she looked up at Vethrak. Are you threatening a war against humanity? We are informing you of consequences, he said. 60 days, Zoethal added. Begin compliance within 60 days, or face the result. Choi looked at the document on the screen. She looked at the faces and the tears around her. Hundreds of alien species watching her, some with open curiosity, some with thinly veiled amusement. She looked at Vethrak, whose yellow eyes had not blinked once since she walked into the chamber. She clicked off her datapad. Thank you for your time, she said. Then she turned and walked out. She walked through the corridor outside the chamber, at a normal pace. Her footsteps were even. She nodded to the council's security personnel at the checkpoint. She rode the transit pod to the human diplomatic quarter of Nexus Prime Station in silence. Only when she was inside the secure communications room, a small lead-lined chamber with no external network connection, did she sit down. Her hands shook now. She let them. She had known this was coming. Not the specific directive, not the specific wording, but the shape of it. Humanity had been managed and dismissed by the Galactic Council for years. It had been denied membership on the grounds of insufficient civilizational development. It had been excluded from trade agreements that covered the systems nearest to Earth. It had been assigned an observer status that carried no votes, no rights, and no protections. It had been treated, consistently and deliberately, like it was not worth taking seriously. And now, finally, the Council had decided to make it formal. She connected to the encrypted channel. It took 4 minutes to establish, bouncing through relay points designed to look like background noise. When the face appeared on the screen, it was Admiral Kim Soo-yeon, sitting in what Choi recognized as Earth's Strategic Command Center in Seoul. The Admiral was a compact woman in her late 50s, with short gray hair and eyes that were always calm. She had commanded 3 wars and come out of all of them without losing her composure once. She looked at Choi and said nothing. She was waiting. They issued the directive, Choi said. 17 systems, 60 days, full military disclosure and a force cap. Admiral Kim did not blink. And if we don't comply, pacification. Silence. Zoethal used that word directly. Admiral Kim asked. Yes, another pause. Then did you believe him? Yes, Choi said. They are not bluffing. They think they can do it. And based on what they know about us. She stopped and said it clearly. They are right. Based on what they know about us. The Admiral looked at her for a long moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something close to it. We've been waiting for this moment, she said quietly. Not hoping for it, but waiting for it. I know. Ambassador, are you safe? For now, they have no reason to detain me yet. I have 60 days of diplomatic cover, but I would rather not be here when things change. Agreed. Sit tight. The Admiral looked to the side, at someone off-screen. Get me Commander Park. She looked back at Choi. We are going to send you a message, Ambassador. A very large one. The call ended. In the deep silence of Earth's most classified military installation, buried under the floor of the Pacific Ocean at a depth that no civilian submersible had ever reached, a series of lights began to come on. They came on one section at a time. First the reactor systems, then the navigation arrays, then the weapons grids, then the life support networks that covered 6 kilometers of corridors, 400 crew decks, and a bridge the size of a city block. The unsaturnal wrath was waking up. It was not a ship in the way that most species understood ships. It was not a vessel. It was closer to a nation that had decided to move. Its hull was made of a composite material that Earth's engineers had spent 30 years developing, absorbing energy, dispersing heat, and reflecting long-range scanning signals in a way that made it look like nothing on any known sensor array. Its main drives could move it through fold space at speeds that no one outside of Earth's military had ever measured, because no one outside of Earth's military had ever seen it move. The Galactic Council believed humanity's most powerful warship was the UNS Resolution, a mid-range cruiser, reasonably armed, 15 years old. They had scanned it once during a border inspection, written up its specifications, and filed it under minor threat, low priority. They had never learned that the Resolution was not the most powerful ship Earth had. They had never learned that the most powerful ship Earth had was not on any public record. They had never learned that, for the past 40 years, while the Council was classifying humanity as a primitive civilization unworthy of membership, Earth's engineers had been building something that the galaxy had no category for. The Titan-class warship program had begun as a thought experiment. What would it take to build a ship that could survive a war alone? Not a fleet, a single ship. A ship that carried its own fighter wings, its own repair facilities, its own power generation, its own food production, its own hospitals. A ship that could fight for years without returning home, that could face a fleet and answer it, that could enter a system and end a conflict without backup. The answer, it turned out, was 40 years and most of a mountain's worth of refined materials. Commander Park Jin-ho was the first person to board the Eternal Wrath after the wake-up sequence completed. He walked from the docking arm into the main corridor and stopped, as he always did, to simply stand in it for a moment. The corridor was wide enough to drive 6 vehicles abreast. The ceiling was 4 stories above him. The lights were still warming up, casting everything in a soft gold glow. He was 43 years old. He had been a naval officer since he was 22. He had served on 6 ships before being assigned to this one, and each of those 6 ships had been the finest vessel he had ever commanded, until this one. He had been captain of the Eternal Wrath for 8 years. He had taken it out twice, for tests and calibrations, never far enough from Earth to be detected. He had run simulations 10,000 times. He had trained his crew for scenarios that most military planners considered impossible. He had been waiting for the call. His communicator chimed. Admiral Kim's voice was clear. Commander Park, Admiral, we have a situation. I heard the summary on the way down, he said. 60 days, pacification threat. The directive is real. We have confirmed it through secondary channels. Ambassador Choi is secure for now. And our response? A brief pause. Then, take the Wrath out. Full deployment. Destination, Nexus Prime. Time of arrival is your discretion, but I want them to have enough time to see you coming, and not enough time to do anything about it. Park stood in the golden light of the corridor. Understood, Park. Her voice shifted slightly. They think they know us. They think they have measured what we are. They think there are no surprises left. She paused. Surprise them. He thought of the 40,000 people in the Kepler colonies. He thought of the 200,000 in the 17 systems. He thought of Ambassador Choi standing alone in that chamber while 600 aliens told her that her people were nothing. Yes, Admiral, he said. We will. He walked toward the bridge. Behind him, the lights of the Eternal Wrath came on all the way. The crew boarded in shifts over the next 6 hours. 640 men and women, each of them handpicked, each of them carrying clearance levels that did not officially exist. Pilots, engineers, weapons specialists, medical staff, navigators, intelligence analysts. They moved through the ship with the practiced ease of people who had trained here, lived here during exercise periods, and understood every corner of it. Lieutenant Lee Changmin took his station at the navigation console on the bridge and ran the fold space calculations for the 3rd time. He was 29, youngest senior officer on the ship, and he had spent 4 years memorizing every star chart within 300 light-years of Earth. Course is locked, he said to no one in particular. Then he looked up and found Commander Park standing behind him, reviewing the same calculations on a separate screen. Sir, estimated travel time to Nexus Prime at standard fold speed is 14 hours. We will not use standard fold speed, Park said. Lee blinked. Sir, use the second drive configuration, the one from the Phase 3 tests. Lee looked at his console. The Phase 3 drive configuration had never been used outside of controlled tests. It pushed the fold space engines past the theoretical safe threshold by routing power through the secondary reactor array in a way that most engineers described as terrifying. It was also approximately 3 times faster than standard fold speed. Course adjusted, Lee said quietly. Estimated travel time, 4 hours and 40 minutes. Park nodded. Good. Let us not give them time to prepare a welcome. Weapons Chief Oh Dae-jung looked up from his station across the bridge. He was a broad man with a shaved head and a long career in Earth's Naval Artillery Division. Weapon systems are at 60% charge, he said. Full charge in 3 hours. Have them at full charge before we drop out of fold space, Park said. I want every system live the moment they can see us. Yes, sir. Park walked to the center of the bridge and sat in the command chair. He looked through the main viewport at the dark water outside, the last of Earth's ocean before they left it behind. The reactors were at full power now. He could feel the faint vibration of it through the chair, like the heartbeat of something very large and very awake. Navigation, he said. Take us out. Yes, sir. Lee said. The Eternal Wrath moved. On Nexus Prime, Ambassador Choi Hai-jin sat in her quarters and waited. She had filed the required diplomatic response to the directive, a formal notification that Earth was reviewing the terms and would provide a reply within the allotted period. It was the kind of language that meant nothing, a placeholder, a way of buying time. But she had spoken to Admiral Kim. She knew what was coming. She opened her personal log and sat for a moment before speaking into it. Day 1 of the 60-day period, she said. The Council issued its ultimatum this morning. They believe they have won. Vethrak looked satisfied when I left. Not gloating, not cruel, just satisfied the way someone looks when they have finished an unpleasant but necessary task. She paused. They have no idea. In all their planning, in all their intelligence reports about Earth, in all their careful assessment of what humanity is and what humanity is capable of, they never thought to ask what we might be hiding. She closed the log. Outside her small window, the stars of deep space burned cold and white, indifferent to everything below them. In 4 hours and 38 minutes, one of them would stop being a star. Fold space was nothing like regular space. Regular space had stars, had distance, had the slow certainty of physics working the way it was supposed to work. Fold space was different. It pressed the fabric of normal reality into a shortcut, a tunnel between 2 points that collapsed the distance between them to almost nothing. Ships that used it appeared to jump from one place to another with no time in between, at least from the outside. From the inside, it was 4 hours and 40 minutes of gray. The gray was not a color exactly. It was more like the absence of everything that made color meaningful. It pressed against the viewport like a wall of static, shifting and rolling without pattern. Some crew members found it deeply unsettling. Others had grown used to it over years of service. A few claimed they found it peaceful. Commander Park Jin-ho was in the second category. He had been in fold space hundreds of times. The gray did not bother him. What bothered him was waiting. And the gray at least moved too fast for waiting to feel like waiting. He was walking the lower deck corridors when Lieutenant Kang Yi-won found him. She was his chief intelligence officer. Young, precise, and slightly too quiet for most people's comfort. She matched his pace as she handed him a tablet. We picked up a Council patrol transmission 40 minutes ago, she said. It was routed through one of their standard deep space relay buoys along the route toward Nexus Prime. Park looked at the tablet. They detected our exit signature? Possibly. The message was short, a sensor anomaly report, classified routine, but the timestamp puts it right after we entered fold space. She tapped the screen. The interesting part is the second transmission, sent 20 minutes later from a different buoy. Same patrol frequency, marked urgent. The Park stopped walking. And the content? Encrypted. We have not broken their current cipher yet. We are about 6 weeks behind on their rotation. She paused. But the header string is interesting. It uses a priority tag we have only seen twice before in intercepted communications. Both times were before a major fleet mobilization. Park looked at her. They are moving ships. We think so. We do not know where or how many. But if they identified our exit signature as something other than a routine transit event, they did not, Park said. He handed the tablet back and started walking again. They identified it as unusual. That is not the same as identifying it as us. The Wrath's fold space signature is not in any Council database. They have never seen a ship with our engine configuration. To their systems, we probably look like a gravitational event, a star flicker, something not worth a fleet mobilization. Kang kept pace with him. And if they send a patrol to investigate before we arrive, then a patrol will see us, Park said, and they will have a very short time to send a message before we continue on our way. He looked at her. Make sure long-range communications jamming is ready. It has been ready since launch, sir. Good. He turned down a side corridor. Walk with me. They moved through the lower decks together, through the fighter bay access tunnels, past the secondary weapons grid, through the lower engineering section, where the drives hummed at a frequency that Park felt more in his chest than heard with his ears. He always walked the ship when he needed to think. There was something about the scale of it that steadied him, a reminder of what they were working with. The Council thinks they know us, he said as they walked. That is the thing. They have had observers near Earth for decades. They have scanned our border systems. They have reviewed our registered military vessels. They have files on everything we have shown them. Kang nodded. And what we have not shown them is exactly this. Exactly. Park paused at a viewport in the hull of the lower deck. Not glass, but a transparent panel of reinforced composite, strong enough to survive a direct artillery strike at close range. Outside was the gray of fold space, shifting and pressing. The program started 42 years ago. Before I was born. Before most of my crew were born. after the first time the Council turned down Earth's membership application. He was quiet for a moment. The officers who started the Titan program did not know if humanity would ever need it. They hoped we would not. But they understood something that the Council never bothered to learn about humans, that when we feel threatened, we do not just react. We prepare. We prepare for the worst thing we can imagine, and then we prepare for something worse than that. Kang looked out at the gray. Do you think the Council would have acted differently if they had known about the wrath? No, Park said. I think they would have acted sooner. I think they would have come for us before we finished it. He turned from the viewport. That is why it was kept secret. Not because we wanted a weapon, but because some of the people in that program understood that sometimes the only thing that keeps you safe is letting the other side underestimate you, right up until the moment you need them to stop. He checked his watch. 2 hours until we drop out of fold space. Let us make sure everything is ready. In the main engineering bay, Chief Engineer Baek Sung-hwan was already doing what he did before every operation. He was walking his circuits. Walking his circuits meant moving from station to station through the engineering section, personally verifying each system with his own eyes rather than trusting the readout boards. He had been doing this for 30 years. He had learned early in his career that systems showed green right up until they did not, and that the things which did not show on readout boards were usually the things that killed you. The Eternal Wrath's engineering section was, by any rational measure, the largest single workspace humanity had ever put in motion. It covered 8 full decks. It employed 92 engineers and technicians. It contained 6 reactor cores, 2 primary, 4 secondary, each of which was large enough to power a small city. The drive system alone was longer than most ships. Baek walked it all. His team followed him in silence, making notes, adjusting, confirming. The Phase 3 drive configuration was holding. The reactors were balanced. The power routing through the secondary array was running hotter than optimal. It always did in the Phase 3 config, but well within tolerances. The weapons systems were drawing charge steadily from the tertiary grid. He stopped at the main reactor display and looked at the numbers. 2 hours until arrival. Full weapons charge in 90 minutes. All critical systems in the green. He allowed himself one small nod of satisfaction, then kept walking. In the medical bay on Deck 12, Dr. Song Ji-yeon was reviewing emergency protocols with her staff for the 3rd time since launch. She was not expecting casualties. No one expected casualties in a confrontation where one side held all the cards. But she had learned, in 20 years of military medicine, that the moment you stopped preparing for the unexpected was the moment the unexpected arrived. Full surgical capacity on standby, she told her team. Not because I think we will need it, because we are ready for anything. She paused. That is what we are. Her staff went back to their preparations. Back on Nexus Prime, the first ripple of something wrong reached the Council's sensor network at the 47th minute after the Eternal Wrath had entered fold space. It came in as a routine anomaly flag from a deep space monitoring station, a distant sensor array positioned to watch for unauthorized transits through Council-controlled space near the Sol System's outer region. The flag was automatically classified as a Class 3 event, which meant it was logged and assigned to a junior analyst for review within 72 hours. The junior analyst who received it was a Velhare technician named Ori, who had been working the night shift at the Council's monitoring center for 3 years, and who found on this particular evening that the anomaly was slightly more than routine. The energy signature was consistent with a fold space transit. That part was not unusual. Ships moved through space constantly, and anomaly flags were common near Sol's outer boundary, where human patrol craft sometimes wandered into the edges of Council-monitored corridors. What was not consistent with a routine transit was the size of the signature. Fold space entry events had a measurable energy footprint. The size of that footprint corresponded to the mass of the transiting object. Ori had reviewed thousands of these. Human patrol ships left signatures in a specific range. Council combat vessels left signatures in a higher range. The signature in front of him now was outside both of those ranges. It was outside every range in the database. Uri ran the calculation twice, then a 3rd time. He filed an urgent report and flagged it for immediate senior review. The report sat in queue for 45 minutes before a senior analyst named Geth Val reviewed it, frowned at the numbers, and sent it up the chain with a note. Likely sensor malfunction. Recommend recalibration of Station 7 Alpha Array, monitoring for secondary confirmation. Geth Val then went to his meal break. The report reached the duty desk of Fleet Commander Zoethal's communications officer at the same time that it reached 6 other duty desks across the station's command structure. a consequence of the urgent flag that had been attached to it. Most of the receiving officers read it, noted Gethval's analysis, and filed it as a probable sensor malfunction. One officer, a Draknar communications lieutenant named Resik, did not file it. Resik was by nature a careful creature. He read the numbers twice. He compared them to the database. He noted that the energy signature was not within the range of any known fold-space vessel type. He noted that the location of the transit event was consistent with a departure vector from the Sol system. Then he did something the other officers had not done. He checked the historical anomaly logs for any previous events with similar signatures. He found nothing, no matches. Not in 40 years of records. That was the part that worried him most. Not the size of the signature exactly, but the fact that it had no precedent, no match, no entry in the database anywhere. He filed the report directly to Fleet Commander Zoethal's personal communications terminal and marked it Priority 1, a flag reserved for events that could not be explained by existing knowledge. Zoethal read it while he was in a meeting with 3 other council members, discussing the timeline of the pacification operation against Earth. He read it once. He read it again. He excused himself from the meeting. Zoethal found Vethrak in the High Counselor's private chamber, a curved room at the highest point of Nexus Prime, with transparent walls that looked out at the black of space in every direction. The old Draknar was sitting in the dark, looking at nothing, the way he often did late in the evening. "There is an anomaly report," Zoethal said. He handed over his personal device with the report pulled up on the screen. Vethrak looked at it. His yellow eyes scanned the numbers slowly. "Sensor malfunction," he said. "That is the initial assessment, but the signature is not consistent with any known vessel. Not ours. Not any allied species. Not human. Not human," Vethrak repeated. "Then it is not relevant to our current operation. The departure vector is consistent with Sol system origin." Vethrak looked up from the screen. His eyes were still, as always. "Explain." Zoethal spread 2 of his upper limbs in a gesture that, in his species, indicated careful uncertainty. The event occurred in the monitoring zone adjacent to Sol's outer boundary. If the reading is accurate, something departed from the Sol system, or very near it, and entered fold space on a bearing that our navigation system calculates as pointing toward this station. Silence. "The humans have no ship capable of generating that energy signature," Vethrak said finally. "We have their entire military inventory. We have reviewed every registered vessel. Their largest combat ship, the Resolution, produces a signature 1/8 the size of this reading. I know. You are suggesting either that our sensors malfunctioned or that the humans have a ship we do not know about." "I am suggesting that we cannot explain the reading," Zoethal said carefully. "I am recommending that we position a patrol wing on a bearing of 317 relative to the station, as a precaution." Vethrak was quiet for a long time. He looked out through the transparent wall at the stars. "Do it," he said at last, "but quietly. I do not want this information circulating through the station. The directive we issued today is a delicate matter. The last thing we need is rumor. Understood?" Zoethal turned to leave. "Fleet Commander." Vethrak's voice stopped him. "The humans have 60 days. Whatever this reading is, whatever it turns out to be, it does not change our position. We are not negotiating." "No," Zoethal agreed, "we are not." He left. Vethrak sat in the dark for a while longer. He looked out at the stars. In 40 years of leading fleets and managing situations like this one, he had learned one reliable truth about conflict. The moment that made you most nervous was almost always nothing. Almost always. He turned off the light and went to rest. Back on the Eternal Wrath, Commander Park returned to the bridge with 1 hour left before their fold space exit. The crew was at their stations, fully active, the quiet hum of professional readiness running through the room. "Status," he said. Li Changmin responded first. "Navigation confirmed. Exit point locked. We will drop out of fold space at approximately 200 kilometers from the outer edge of Nexus Prime's sensor network, close enough to be fully visible on their long-range arrays, far enough to give them a moment to understand what they are looking at." "Weapons?" Park said. Oh Daejung looked up. "Full charge on all primary and secondary grids, all targeting arrays warm and tracking. Main batteries loaded and ready. Point defense grid is live and operational." He paused. "Everything is ready, sir." "Fighter wings?" Park said. Lieutenant Commander Shin Bo-young answered from her station. "All wings prepped. Pilots at standby. Launch authorization pending your order." Park sat down in his command chair and looked at the gray outside the viewport. It was shifting and rolling, as it always did, pressing against the transparent composite, with the quiet indifference of a universe that did not particularly care what happened in it. He had been waiting 8 years for this, not wanting it, but preparing for it with every exercise, every drill, every simulation, every system check. He had trained his crew to be ready for the moment when the ship stopped being a secret and started being a statement. That moment was 51 minutes away. He reached down to the armrest and opened the ship-wide channel. His voice carried through every corridor, every deck, every compartment of the Eternal Wrath. "This is Commander Park. We are approaching our exit point. In approximately 50 minutes, we will drop out of fold space at Nexus Prime. The Galactic Council issued an ultimatum against Earth 3 days ago. They gave our ambassador 3 minutes on the floor and told her that if we did not comply, they would pacify us." He let that word sit for a moment. They believe they know what we are. They believe they have measured us. They believe there is nothing we can do that they need to take seriously. He paused. "We are going to show them who we actually are. Not to start a war. Not to conquer anything. We are going there to say no, and to say it in a way that cannot be ignored." Another pause. "I am proud to serve with every person on this ship. Whatever happens in the next few hours, remember why we are here. 200,000 people who need us to get this right." He closed the channel. The gray of fold space pressed against the viewport, shifting and rolling. 49 minutes. The Eternal Wrath flew on through the dark. The first alarm was soft. Nexus Prime's outer sensor network stretched across 200,000 kilometers of space, in every direction from the station. It was the most sophisticated detection grid the Galactic Council had ever built. 60 years of refinement, upgraded after every major conflict, capable of detecting a fold space emergence event at extreme range and identifying the transiting vessel within seconds. The soft alarm was the network flagging an incoming fold space event at the edge of its detection radius. This happened many times each day. Ships arrived at Nexus Prime constantly. Council vessels, diplomatic transports, merchant convoys, patrol craft returning from assignment. The soft alarm was routine. What came next was not. The fold space emergence event was enormous. Not larger than expected for a big ship, larger than the system's database had a category for. The sensor network processed it, looked for a match in its registry of known vessel classes, found nothing, and did something it had almost never done in its 60 years of operation. It escalated its alarm to critical. The critical alarm was not soft. It rang through every command deck, every sensor station, and every security post on Nexus Prime simultaneously. It was the kind of alarm that woke people up, the kind that brought officers running, the kind that lit up every screen in the station's command center with red. Lieutenant Resick was still at his desk. He had never left, too unsettled by the report he had filed, when the critical alarm went off. He looked at his screen and felt something he had not felt in his 6 years of service: fear. The fold space emergence event had resolved into a solid contact. The sensor network had finished its scans and generated a preliminary object analysis. Resick stared at the numbers and read them 3 times. Length, 6.2 kilometers. Beam, 1.4 kilometers. Displacement, classified as impossible by the system, because the system's displacement scale did not go high enough to register it. Power output, off the chart. The sensor system's power reading scale maxed out at a figure that corresponded to a large battle cruiser at full combat power. Whatever was outside was producing power at a level that made the scale irrelevant. Resick sent the data to Fleet Commander Zoethal, and then sat very still. Zoethal was already awake. He had never really slept after their conversation. He was at his command terminal when the critical alarm triggered, and he was already reviewing the preliminary data when Resick's report came through. He read the numbers once. He stood up. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling viewport at the side of his chamber and looked outward. For a moment there was nothing. Then there was something. The Eternal Wrath had not yet come into visual range. It was still hundreds of kilometers away, closing at a steady pace, well outside weapons range for either side. But the station's external lighting array automatically activated directional spotlights when a new contact approached, and the nearest spotlight caught a reflection in the dark. The reflection was wrong. It was too large. It extended too far in both directions. It did not move like a ship moved. It moved like a landmass moved, like something geological rather than mechanical, slow, and absolutely certain of itself. Zoethal stared at it for a long time. Then he walked to the communications terminal and opened a channel to Vethrak. "High Counselor," he said, "I need you on the command deck." Immediately. Vethrak arrived on the command deck 4 minutes later. He was wearing the formal robes of his office, which meant he had taken the time to dress properly rather than rushing. A deliberate choice, an assertion of composure, a refusal to show alarm. But when he walked to the main viewport and saw what the external cameras had resolved into a clear image, he stopped. He stood very still for a very long time. Around him, the command deck was operating at a controlled version of chaos. Officers at their stations, screens displaying data, voices reporting in short, efficient bursts. But the voices were quieter than they should have been. Every crew member who looked at the main display for more than a moment went quiet. The eternal wrath was visible on the main screen now. The long-range cameras had locked onto it and rendered it in full detail. It was the largest artificial object most of the people in that room had ever seen. 6.2 kilometers from nose to stern, nearly 1.5 kilometers wide at its broadest point. Its hull was the dark non-color of space, which meant that it seemed to absorb the starlight around it rather than reflect it, except where the station's spotlights caught its surface and lit up the geometric complexity of its design. Weapons emplacements the size of office buildings, sensor arrays that swept its upper hull like a forest, fighter bay openings, dozens of them, arrayed along its flanks like the pores of some massive organism, and it was moving toward them, not at attack speed, not at the frantic pace of an incoming strike. It was moving at a deliberate, unhurried rate that somehow communicated more menace than a charge would have. It had arrived. It was coming in. It was not in a hurry. It did not need to be. Weapons status, Zoethal said, his voice controlled. All defensive systems online, his communications officer replied. Offensive batteries at standby charge. A pause. Sir, our targeting systems are having difficulty achieving a full lock. The vessel's hull appears to be diffusing our targeting beams. We are getting partial solutions, but nothing stable enough for accurate fire. Zoethal noted this with a stillness that was almost preternatural. The patrol wing. Where is it? 300 kilometers off the station's port side, sir. Bearing 317, as ordered. 8 vessels. Another pause. Commander, they are requesting instructions. Zoethal looked at the main screen. He looked at the vast, dark shape filling it and thought, with a clarity that surprised him, that 8 patrol ships was not a number that would change anything about this situation. Tell them to hold position, he said. Do not engage. He looked at Vethrak. The High Counselor had not moved or spoken since walking in. He was still looking at the screen. His yellow eyes had not blinked once. What is it? Vethrak said at last, very quietly. I do not know, Zoethal said, which was the most honest answer he had ever given. Ambassador Choi Hai-jin was asleep when the alarm went off. She came awake fast. Military service had given her that, the ability to go from sleep to full alert in seconds. She was at her communications terminal before the alarm's second cycle. The screen showed the external camera feed from the diplomatic quarters viewport, which looked out over the station's port side. She saw it. She sat down. Her hands were perfectly still. Then slowly she smiled. It was not a triumphant smile. It was the smile of someone who has been very afraid for a very long time, in a place far from home, doing a difficult job, and who has just seen something that tells her she is not alone anymore. She watched the eternal wrath move through the dark toward the station. She watched its scale resolve into something that stopped making sense as a ship and started making sense as a fact. A statement. An answer to something that had been asked in a council chamber 3 days ago, with 600 alien representatives watching and a 3-minute speaking slot, and the word pacification hanging in the air like smoke. A communications request appeared on her screen. She recognized the identifier, Commander Park. She accepted the connection. His face appeared on the screen. He was sitting in the command chair of the Eternal Wrath's bridge, and behind him, through the viewport of the ship, she could see Nexus Prime growing larger. Ambassador, he said. Commander, her voice was very steady. I see you made it. We made good time. He looked at her with the calm of someone who had been preparing for a very specific moment for a very long time and had finally arrived at it. How are you, Ambassador? Better, she said, much better. Good. He folded his hands on the armrest of his chair. I am going to open a channel to the Council in approximately 15 minutes. I would like you to be present for that. I will be there. They may try to restrict your movement on the station. Security lockdown protocol. I know their protocols, she said. I have been here 12 years. I know every corridor in this station. I know you do. There was something in his tone, not quite warmth, not quite humor, but something close to both. 15 minutes, Ambassador. He cut the connection. Choi stood up, straightened her uniform, checked the Earth flag on her shoulder, and walked to the door of her quarters. The corridor outside was full of Council security personnel moving in rapid formation. One of them, a Draknar officer with rank markings on his collar, held up a hand when he saw her. Ambassador, the station is in security lockdown. All non-council personnel are required to remain in their quarters until. I am the official representative of Earth, Choi said simply. The ship outside is Earth's. I will be present at the communication session with the Council. You are welcome to escort me, which I would prefer, both for efficiency and so that there is no confusion about my status. The officer stared at her. She stared back. He stepped aside. On the command deck of the Eternal Wrath, Commander Park watched Nexus Prime fill the main viewport. The station was large, a structure built over 300 years by the most powerful political alliance in the known galaxy. It was an engineering achievement by any standard. The Eternal Wrath was larger. "Fighter wings," he said. Lieutenant Commander Shin Bo-young responded from her station. "All wings prepped and ready in bay. Awaiting launch authorization. Keep them ready. Do not launch unless I give the order." "Yes, sir. Weapons," he said. Dae-jung looked up. "Full charge. All grids live. Targeting solutions being continuously updated." He paused. "Sir, the station has about 64 surface-mounted weapons emplacements, plus whatever is on the 8 patrol ships off their port side. They have a partial targeting lock on us. I would estimate 30% accuracy at this range. And we have full targeting solution on the station. 98% lock. The patrol ships, 96% on all 8. Park nodded slowly. "Do not fire unless fired upon." "Clear, clear, sir. Communications," Park said. He looked at Lieutenant Jang Na-yan, his communications officer. "Open a channel to Nexus Prime, all frequencies. Broadcast on the Council's official diplomatic band." Jang's hands moved across her console. "Channel open, sir." Park looked forward at the viewport, at the station, at the shape of the galaxy's most powerful political institution sitting there in the dark, watching him approach. With its weapons partially aimed and its sensors working, and 600 years of unchallenged authority pressing against what was happening right now. "This is Commander Park Jin-ho of the United Nations spaceship Eternal Wrath," he said, his voice quiet and even. "I am requesting an immediate session with the Galactic Council. Please have High Counselor Vethrak and all senior council members present." He paused for one moment. "This conversation is going to be important." The channel crackled. Then a voice came through, stiff, formal, trying very hard to sound unaffected. It was Zoethal. "Commander, you are operating an unregistered vessel in restricted council space. Please identify your vessel class and state your authorization." Park considered the question. "I think," he said, "that we should speak face-to-face, or as close to face-to-face as current technology allows. Please assemble the council. We will be at holding position in approximately 12 minutes. He reached over and closed the outgoing channel. He left the incoming one open so the council could hear the quiet, steady sound of the Eternal Wrath's bridge, the calm breathing of a crew at their stations, the soft hum of systems running at full capacity, the deep vibration of engines that had no equal in the known galaxy. He looked at Lee Changmin. "Take us in, holding position at 4 kilometers. "Yes, sir," Lee said. The Eternal Wrath moved forward, and Nexus Prime grew larger ahead of them, and the stars behind the station looked suddenly very small. In the council chamber, the alarms were still sounding. Representatives were filing into their seats from emergency summons, many of them still adjusting their clothing, still processing what the external cameras were showing on every screen in the station. The chamber filled quickly. No one spoke loudly. They looked at the main display, at the shape of the Eternal Wrath, now close enough for the cameras to resolve individual details on its hull, and they were very quiet. High Counselor Vethrak took his place at the center of the platform. He stood rather than sat. He looked out at the chamber, at the hundreds of representatives watching him, at the screen behind him showing the ship that humanity had brought to his door. He thought about the directive. He thought about the 60 days. He thought about the word pacification and how clean and simple it had sounded 3 days ago, when he had believed he understood exactly what humanity was. He sat down. He kept his face composed. He was the High Counselor of the Galactic Council, and he had faced difficult situations before, but he had never faced anything quite like this. Ambassador Choi Hyjin walked into the chamber and took her place at the center of the floor. No 3-minute speaking slot this time. No one tried to stop her or redirect her to the observer section. The security officer who had escorted her from her quarters stood near the back of the chamber and did not interfere. She stood at the center of the floor and looked up at Vethrak. He looked back at her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then, the main communication screen at the front of the chamber activated, and Commander Park's face appeared, and whatever had been in the room before, whatever balance of power, whatever assumption of authority, whatever certainty about how things were, and who mattered and what was possible, shifted in a way that everyone in that chamber felt, all at once, without anyone saying a word. The Galactic Council was about to learn something new about humanity. It was going to be a difficult lesson, but it was going to be an honest one. The Council's main chamber had never looked quite like this before. It had hosted summits that ended wars. It had processed membership applications from 37 species. It had voted on measures that rerouted the economies of entire star systems. It had been the site of declarations of war, treaties of peace, and sentences of pacification against civilizations that refused to comply with its authority. It had never been assembled at this hour, under these circumstances, for this reason. Vethrak sat at the center of the raised platform. His face was composed, his posture was correct. He had been composing and correcting himself since the moment he saw the eternal wrath on the external camera feed, and he intended to continue doing so regardless of what happened next. Around him, the tiered seats were filled. Word had spread through the station quickly, the critical alarm, the external cameras, the image that was on every personal screen and public display within 5 minutes of arrival. The representatives of 63 species sat in their seats, and most of them were very quiet, and most of them were looking at the large main display at the front of the chamber, which showed the external camera feed. The Eternal Wrath had taken a holding position 4 kilometers from the station. It had not attempted to dock. It was far too large for any of Nexus Prime's docking structures. It simply hung there in the dark, larger than anything the Council's engineers had put into space, and it waited. Ambassador Choi Hai-jin stood at the center of the main floor, the same place she had stood 3 days ago when Vethrak gave her 3 minutes and told her about the directive. She was standing in the same spot, in the same uniform, with the same Earth flag on her shoulder. She looked different, though, not in appearance. But something in the way she stood had changed. The careful, deliberate steadiness of 3 days ago had been replaced with something simpler. She was just standing there, without effort, because she did not need effort anymore. The main communication screen activated. Commander Park's face appeared. He was on the bridge of the Eternal Wrath, his command chair slightly off-center of the frame, the viewport behind him showing the distant shape of Nexus Prime from the outside. He looked exactly as calm as Vethrak was trying to look, with the difference that Park's calm was real. The chamber went completely silent. "High Counselor Vethrak," Park said. His voice came through the translation system in smooth, even tones. "Thank you for assembling on short notice. I will try to be efficient with your time." Vethrak looked at him for a long moment. "Commander Park." His voice was careful. "Your vessel has arrived in Council space without authorization. This is a violation of Council law. I require you to state your purpose and your authority." "My purpose is to deliver a message from Earth," Park said. "My authority is the same as any commanding officer sent to represent their government in a diplomatic matter." He paused. "Regarding authorization, I am going to respectfully suggest that we table that question for the time being and focus on the more immediate matter, which is the directive your council issued 3 days ago." Park's voice remained level. "The one that gives humanity 60 days to abandon 200,000 civilians and submit our military records for your review. Under threat of, I believe the word used was pacification." The chamber was so quiet that the ventilation system was audible. "That directive stands," Vethrak said. Park nodded slowly as if this was the answer he had expected. "Then I have a counter-proposal. I would like the Council to rescind the directive. I would like the blockade on the Kepler 442 system lifted within 48 hours. I would like every human civilian currently held in Council-monitored detention released. And I would like a formal acknowledgement that Earth is entitled to operate in the 17 systems named in the directive without interference." No one in the chamber moved. Then Zoethal leaned forward. "Commander, you are one ship." "Yes," Park agreed. "You are one ship alone in Council space, with no fleet support and no allies among the assembled species." "Yes. What possible position do you believe gives you the right to make demands of this Council?" Park was quiet for a moment. "Step outside," he said. Zoethal blinked, a rapid multipart blink that in his species indicated confusion. "I mean," Park said with the first trace of something that might have been dry humor, "look at the cameras. Look at what is parked 4 kilometers from your station." He let that sit for a second. "You asked what position I am negotiating from. The answer is, the Bridge of the Eternal Wrath, which is a Titan-class warship, and there is no ship in the Council fleet that can say the same." "You think one vessel," Zoethal began. "I think," Park said quietly, "that you should have your sensor officers show you the targeting solution my weapons grid currently has on Nexus Prime, and on your 8 patrol ships." He paused. "And then perhaps we should have a different kind of conversation." Another silence. Longer this time. Vethrak turned slightly to the side, where an aide stepped forward with a tablet. The aide spoke quietly, but the expression on Vethrak's face when he looked at the tablet was visible to the entire chamber. For the first time in the memory of most of the people in the room, the High Counselor looked uncertain. The sensor data was showing a 98% targeting solution on the station. It was showing that the Eternal Wrath had full weapons lock on every weapons emplacement on Nexus Prime's hull, on all 8 patrol ships, and on the 6 Council heavy cruisers that had been scrambled after the critical alarm triggered, and were now approaching from the far side of the station at attack speed. It was also showing something that no one in the Council's command structure had expected. The Eternal Wrath had already acquired targeting solutions on those 6 cruisers as well, even though they had been traveling under stealth configuration and had not appeared on normal scans. Park watched Vethrak read the tablet. The 6 heavy cruisers coming in on the far side, Park said, "We see them. Our targeting systems have had lock on them since they dropped out of the station's shadow 11 minutes ago." He glanced briefly to the side of his screen. "I want to be very clear that I am not here to fight. My preference is to have this conversation calmly and reach an agreement that works for both parties. That is my preference." He looked back at the camera. "But if the Council chooses to test what the Eternal Wrath can do, I will not stop you. And I want you to understand what the result of that test will look like before you choose." Zoethal straightened in his seat. His mandibles clicked once. "Fleet Commander Dreakos," he said, speaking to the commander of the incoming cruisers, whose channel was running parallel to the diplomatic line. "Attack pattern Zoethal." Vethrak's voice was quiet. Zoethal stopped. Vethrak looked at the main screen. He looked at Park. He looked at the camera feed, showing the Eternal Wrath hanging 4 kilometers away, its hull absorbing the light, its weapons arrays pointed at everything within range. "Continue," he said to Zoethal. Zoethal turned back to his secondary channel. "Fleet Commander Dreakos, attack pattern 7, full engagement." On the bridge of the Eternal Wrath, the warning alert pinged once. Lieutenant Zhang Nayan announced calmly, 6 heavy cruisers, acceleration to attack speed, weapons hot, incoming. Park said nothing for a moment. He had known this would happen, not because he had wanted it to, but because he understood with precision that the Council had to try. An institution that had operated unchallenged for 6 centuries could not simply stand down because a new variable appeared. It had to test the variable first. It had to know. "Daejung," Park said. "Sir," Daejung replied. "Point no main weapons, disable, do not destroy, understood. Point defense active." The next 4 minutes were unlike any battle in the known history of the Galactic Council. The 6 heavy cruisers came in at full attack speed, weapons firing, a coordinated strike that would have disabled or destroyed most known vessels in the first exchange. It was a textbook Council attack pattern, refined over 200 years of combat doctrine, proven in 43 engagements. The Eternal Wrath's point defense system was not a weapon that most Council analysts had ever considered in their threat assessments, because most Council analysts had never encountered a vet vessel that needed a point defense system of that scale. It was designed for exactly this: incoming fire from multiple vectors at high volume, requiring precise interception before contact. The incoming weapons fire was intercepted, all of it. Not most of it, all of it. The point defense arrays tracked and neutralized every round, every energy burst, every guided projectile that the 6 cruisers launched in the first exchange. The Eternal Wrath did not move. It did not maneuver. It sat in place and stopped everything that came at it, with a precision so complete that it looked less like combat and more like a demonstration. Then Daejung activated the secondary response protocol, the one that used targeted pulse emitters to disable enemy weapon systems without destroying the hull. It took 47 seconds. When it was done, all 6 cruisers were still intact. Their hulls were undamaged. Their crews were unharmed. But every weapons system on every ship had been precisely disabled, burned out at the emitter level, leaving the ships alive but unable to fire. The 8 patrol ships off the station's port side had observed this. 3 of them moved to engage. The point defense handled them in 16 seconds. The other 5 held position. Daejung looked up at Park. "All contacts neutralized, sir. No hull breaches. Crews intact. Good." Then he looked at the communication screen. Vethrak was still on it. The High Counselor had watched the entire engagement. On the display behind him, the same display the entire Council chamber was watching. He had watched 6 of his best warships stopped in less than a minute. He had watched the 3 patrol ships disabled in 16 seconds. He had watched the Eternal Wrath sit absolutely still through all of it, not moving, not flinching, like something that did not need to. The chamber was completely, utterly still. No one spoke. No one moved, 63 species in their seats, and not one of them made a sound. Park waited a moment longer. Then he said, "That was point defense. That was the Eternal Wrath protecting itself passively. I did not fire a single offensive weapon. He folded his hands on the armrest of his chair. I would like to avoid firing an offensive weapon. I would like to avoid demonstrating what happens when I do. But I will fire one shot, into open space, not at any vessel, just into the dark, if you need more information to make your decision. No one on the council spoke. Park looked at Vethrak. High Counselor, the offer I made earlier is still open. Resign the directive, the blockade. Release the detained civilians. Acknowledge Earth's right to operate in those 17 systems. He let each item sit for a moment. In exchange, I will leave council space peacefully, and Earth will continue its current policy of non-aggression. We are not asking to conquer anything. We are not asking for your resources or your territory. We are asking to be left alone. Vethrak looked at him. His yellow eyes were still, but something behind them had changed. You would leave, Vethrak said carefully, simply because we rescinded the directive and lifted the blockade, released the detainees, and acknowledged our territorial rights. Yes. Park paused. We are not at war with the Galactic Council. We have never wanted to be. We built the Eternal Wrath because we felt we had no choice. Because we knew, eventually, that we would need to be able to say no to a threat and have that no mean something. That is all this is. We are saying no. He let the word sit in the chamber. No, it landed differently than it had before. When Ambassador Choi said no in this chamber 3 days ago, it meant nothing. It was the no of someone with no leverage, no power, no ability to back the word up. It had been dismissed before the door closed behind her. When Commander Park said it now, with the Eternal Wrath hanging 4 kilometers outside and 14 disabled warships drifting in the dark, it was a different kind of word entirely. It was the kind of no that ended arguments. Ambassador Choi Jin stood at the center of the chamber floor and listened to the silence that followed. She had spent 12 years in this room. She had heard this council issue judgments, dismiss petitions, and hand down decisions that affected billions of lives without once asking if the affected parties agreed. She had watched humanity be reduced to 3 minutes, and an observer seat, and a classification that said nothing about what her species actually was. She looked up at Vethrak. He was looking at her, not at the screen. She met his gaze and held it. She did not speak. She had already said everything she needed to say 3 days ago. The rest of the conversation was between him and the man on the screen. Between him and the 6.2-kilometer argument parked 4 kilometers away. Zoethal spoke. His voice was controlled, but it was the control of a man who is holding something difficult. You ask us to reverse a unanimous council decision. You ask us to lift an enforcement action. You ask us to release detainees. You ask us to acknowledge territorial rights that we have already formally contested. He paused. You are asking us to undo everything we have decided. Yes, Park said, based on the threat represented by one ship. Based on the reality represented by one ship, Park said. I am not threatening you, Fleet Commander. I am informing you. There is a difference. Zoethal was quiet. Vethrak said nothing for a long time. He looked at the disabled ships on the display. He looked at the camera feed. He looked at the numbers his sensor officers were reading to him quietly. The power output still climbing. The targeting solutions still locked. The weapon systems of the Eternal Wrath still live and ready, and waiting for an order that Park had not yet given. He thought about what Resik's report had said. Unknown vessel class. No match in 40 years of records. No match anywhere. He thought about the 42 years of history he did not know about. The preparation he had not detected. The ship that had been built in secret while the Council filed humanity under minor threat, low priority, and went on with the business of running a galaxy. He thought about Ambassador Choi, standing in the center of the floor 3 days ago, and the way he had looked at her when he told her she had 3 minutes. He understood something now that he had not understood then. He had been wrong, not just about the ship, about everything. About what humanity was and what it was capable of and what it had been doing quietly, for decades, while the Council looked at the surface of it and decided it had seen enough. He was the High Counselor of the Galactic Council. He had been wrong before. He had always found a way to manage being wrong. He would manage it this time too. But first he had to say something he had not said in a very long time. We will need an hour, he said. Park on the screen nodded once. We will be here. The channel went to standby. The chamber erupted. Not in shouts, not in chaos, but in the urgent overlapping voices of 63 species all trying to process what they had just witnessed. Representatives turned to each other. ADs rushed to counselors with tablets. Senior officers spoke in low, urgent tones in every language the translation system could handle. Vethrak stood. The room went quiet. Private session, he said. All non-council staff will do the chamber. The council will deliberate alone. He did not look at Ambassador Choi. He did not need to. He already knew what she would say, if she could say anything right now. He already knew what the next hour would decide and where it would end. He had known, somewhere he was not quite ready to admit to yet, from the moment he saw the eternal wrath on the camera feed. The chamber cleared. The council closed in on itself as it always had to make a decision. Outside, 4 kilometers away, the eternal wrath waited, still, patient, absolute. The stars burned cold around it, and the disabled ships drifted in the dark, and the clock ran toward 1 hour, and the galaxy held its breath. The silence in the council chamber lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds before the first voice broke it. Vethrak did not call for a formal vote. He did not consult the procedural committee. He did not follow the standard council protocol for responding to a diplomatic ultimatum, because the standard protocol assumed a situation where the council held all the advantages, and that was no longer the situation he was in. He had been the High Counselor for 200 years, and he understood, with the instinct of someone who had survived that long, in that role, that there were moments when protocol was irrelevant. This was one of them. The private session opened with Zoethal. He argued for delay, not full refusal, but delay. He wanted time to move a larger fleet into position, to contact allied species who might contribute warships, to explore every option before agreeing to anything. He was a military commander, and his instinct was that more force was always an answer. He made his case calmly and with the discipline of a soldier who had seen wars and understood what they cost. Councillor Breva heard him out. She was the representative of the Thenari species and the oldest member of the current chamber after Vethrak himself. She had served on the council for 112 years. She had watched civilizations rise and fall, had voted on decisions that shaped the galaxy, and had never once been known to speak without weighing her words first. She waited until Zoethal was finished. Then she said something that ended the discussion. "We did not lose today because they are stronger," she said, in the careful, measured tones of someone who had seen many things go wrong and learned to speak precisely about them. "We lost because we were wrong. We classified this species too early. We built our entire understanding of humanity on the assumption that what we could see was all there was. We stopped looking," she paused. "That is not a military failure. It is a failure of understanding. And if we are being honest with ourselves, which we must be in this room right now, it is a failure of respect." No one spoke. "They are not asking us for territory," she continued. "They are not asking for resources or power or a seat at the table they were never given. They are asking us to treat them correctly, to undo what we did 3 days ago, to acknowledge that we went too far." She looked at Vethrak. "That is a manageable request. Denying it further serves no purpose I can calculate." Vethrak agreed. He had agreed for the past 30 minutes. But having Breva say it aloud in front of the chamber gave him the political framework he needed. The High Counselor of the Galactic Council could not be seen to simply fold under the arrival of a single ship, but the Council, in a private session, making a reasoned recalibration based on new information and a proper assessment of changed circumstances. That was different. That was governance. That was what institutions did when they encountered new facts. They adjusted. He let 2 more counselors speak briefly, heard their positions, and then raised his hand for silence. 49 minutes after the private session began, he stood and walked back toward the main chamber door. The chamber was still crowded when he returned. Most representatives had not left their seats during the wait. They had sat in near silence, talking quietly among themselves in small groups, watching the external camera feed on the main display, watching the eternal wrath hold its position outside. It had not moved, not a kilometer, not a meter. It was exactly where it had been when the private session began. 4 kilometers out, still, patient. Its weapons arrays still lived. Its targeting solution still locked on everything within range. It looked like it could wait forever. It probably could. When Vethrak returned to the platform, the room went still. He stood for a moment. He looked at Ambassador Choi. He looked at the screen, where Park's face appeared as soon as the communications channel reopened, waiting, his expression unchanged from an hour ago. "After review," Vethrak said, his voice carrying through the chamber's system in the same measured tones he had used for 2 centuries of decisions. "The Council has determined that the directive issued on this date requires modification. The territorial enforcement provisions affecting human settlement zones in the Kepler 442 system and the 17 systems listed in the original document will be suspended pending a full formal review." He paused. "The blockade currently in effect around the Kepler 442 colonies will be lifted within 48 hours. All human nationals currently in Council-monitored detention will be processed for release within 72 hours. The chamber was absolutely still. he continued. Additionally, the Council acknowledges that the current classification of Earth and its territories as Tier 3 observer status is subject to review. A formal reclassification process will be initiated within 90 days, with full Tier 1 standing as the working proposal under consideration. Tier 1 standing. Full membership, full rights, full recognition. The thing humanity had been denied for 12 years. The thing that the Council had told Ambassador Choi, in session after session, year after year, was not available to a species of Earth's classification. Choi stood very still. She did not let her face show everything she felt in that moment. There was too much of it, and this was not the moment for it. This was the moment for steady composure and clear eyes. And the knowledge that the job was not quite finished yet. The Council further notes, Vethrak said, and here his voice shifted slightly. Not softer, but more precise, like someone choosing each word with great care, that the events of this session will be classified as a diplomatic resolution and will not be characterized in official records as a military confrontation of any kind. He looked at the screen. At Park, Commander, the Council accepts your terms. We ask that you withdraw your vessel from Council space within 24 hours, and that future contact between Earth's government and the Council proceed through established diplomatic channels. Park looked at him. The Bridge of the Eternal Wrath was quiet behind him. Li Changmin at navigation, Oh Dae-jung at weapons, Shin Bo-young at air wing control, Jang Na-yeon at communications, Kang Yi-won standing near the back of the bridge, arms crossed watching. All of them listening. Agreed, Park said. On behalf of Earth, we accept the Council's terms. He paused. And we accept the characterization as a diplomatic resolution. Something moved in his expression, not a smile, but the precursor to one, quiet and genuine. That is all it ever needed to be. He glanced to the side. Ambassador Choi, do you need anything else from this session before we close? Choi looked at Vethrak. She looked at the chamber around her. The tiers of seats, the representatives of 63 species. All of them watching her now with very different expressions than they had worn 3 days ago. One thing, she said. Vethrak looked at her. Ambassador. I would like the formal acknowledgement on record, she said. Not the military terms, those will be documented in the enforcement log. The other one, the Tier 1 standing recognition. She was not loud, she was not harsh. I would like it read into the official session record right now, in this chamber, so that it is documented in the Council's permanent archive and cannot be revised or quietly removed at a later date. She paused. That is all I am asking for, one sentence. On record. Another silence. Vethrak looked at her for a long moment. 200 years old. The head of an institution that had denied this specific thing to humanity for 12 consecutive years. The leader of a council that had 3 days ago told this woman that her people had 60 days to comply or face destruction. He looked at her. And she looked back at him, and she did not look away, and she did not soften her expression, and she did not add anything more than what she had already said. Let the record show, he said, that the Galactic Council formally acknowledges that Earth and its associated territories are recognized as a Tier 1 civilizational entity, with all rights and standing accorded thereto, effective from the current session date. The chamber was silent. Then, from somewhere in the upper tiers, from the section reserved for a small species called the Venu, who communicated partly through sound and partly through resonance, there came a sound. It was what passed in their language for recognition, for witnessing something that mattered. It was not exactly applause, but it was something like it. Others followed. Not all, not even most, but enough. The sound moved through the chamber like a small wave, unexpected and real. Choi stood at the center of the floor and let it wash over her. She had been in this chamber many times. She had stood in this exact spot many times. She had done it for 12 years, session after session, with 3 minutes and no rights and the quiet weight of a civilization counting on her to hold the line. She looked at the screen. Park was watching her. She looked at him and gave a very small nod. He returned it. The session closed. The Eternal Wrath began its withdrawal 20 minutes later. Park stood at the main viewport of the bridge as Nexus Prime grew smaller behind them. He watched it diminish, first to the size of a building, then to the size of a house, then to a cluster of lights in the dark. He watched it until it was too small to distinguish from the stars around it. He was thinking about the 40,000 people in the Kepler colonies who had been waiting 9 weeks for medical resupply. He was thinking about the 200,000 people in the 17 systems who would receive word, in the next few hours, that the directive against them had been suspended. He was thinking about 12 years of Ambassador Choi standing in that chamber with 3 minutes and no rights, carrying something very heavy for a very long time without putting it down. He was thinking about the 42 years of the Titan program, the engineers who started it before he was born, the officers who kept it secret through multiple administrations, the workers who built the Eternal Wrath in shifts, in the deep ocean, over decades, doing it because they understood that someday, it would matter. It mattered today. Navigation, he said. Set course for Earth, standard fold speed. Yes, sir, Lee said. Park went to his chair and sat down. Channel to Admiral Kim is open, sir, Jang said. Kim Su-yeon appeared on the screen. She looked at him. Commander Admiral. Mission complete. All objectives achieved. No casualties. Council has agreed to all terms. He paused. Ambassador Choi as well. She will follow on a diplomatic transport within 48 hours. Kim was quiet for a moment. Her expression did not change. It rarely did. But her eyes were different. The eyes of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just felt some of the weight lift. Well done, Park, she said. Come home, he nodded. Yes, Admiral. On our way. The news traveled faster than the Eternal Wrath did. By the time the ship dropped into fold space for the journey back to Earth, the communications networks that connected the known galaxy were already carrying fragmented reports of what had happened at Nexus Prime. The reports were incomplete at first, restricted, filtered, the Council attempting to manage the narrative. But the reality of a 6.2-kilometer ship and 14 disabled warships was not something that stayed quiet for long. The Council's own member species began asking questions. What was the vessel? Where had it come from? What was a Titan class? What did it mean that Earth had been reclassified as Tier 1? Other questions followed, quieter ones. The kind that were not asked in public sessions but were asked in private communications between intelligence services and government advisors and military planners across 100 star systems. How long had they had it? How many were there? Why had no one known? The honest answer to the last question was the one that bothered the analysts most. Because they had stopped looking. Because humanity had been classified, assessed, and filed away. Because the quiet, steady, persistent work of 42 years had been done in the dark and under the water, and in the spaces that confident assumptions leave behind. The galaxy had not known humanity at all. It had known a version of humanity, the version it had decided to see, filtered through the assumption that the species was minor and manageable, and not worth serious attention. It was beginning to know the real thing now. That changed the calculations for every species in the known galaxy. Alliances were reconsidered. Threat assessments were revised. Intelligence agencies filed new reports with the same note at the top of each one. We do not know what else they have. The Eternal Wrath was visible and documented. What was not visible, not documented, not registered anywhere? That was the part that kept people awake. When the Eternal Wrath came out of fold space at the edge of the Sol system, it was early morning on the Korean peninsula. Admiral Kim was at her desk in the Strategic Command Center in Seoul when the confirmation ping appeared on her screen. Home system entry confirmed, all systems nominal, crew status green. She picked up her personal comm and called the president. It is done, she said. The Wrath is home. A pause on the line. And the ambassador? Safe on her way. 48 hours. Another pause. Tier 1 standing. Yes, Kim said, the longest pause yet. After 12 years. After 12 years, she agreed. And 42 more before that, if you count the work that made today possible. She was quiet for a moment, looking out the window of the command center at the city below. Seoul, full of light and sound and the ordinary, irreplaceable weight of daily life. Ordinary people going about their morning. Unaware of what had happened. Unaware of the thing that had been keeping them safe for 40 years in the deepest water of the Pacific, waiting for the day it would be needed. They know who we are now, she said. Yes, that changes things. Yes, it does. She ended the call. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the command center. Then she reached for her coffee, which had gone cold, and drank it anyway. Commander Park Jin-ho brought the Eternal Wrath into its deep ocean berth 3 hours later. The crew disembarked in the same orderly shifts they had boarded in. They were quiet. Not subdued, but the kind of quiet that comes after something that mattered. They moved through the corridors of the facility and into the briefing rooms with the calm of people who had done their job and understood what it meant. Park was the last to leave the ship. He always was. He walked the corridors one final time from bow to stern. He checked nothing. He was not looking for faults or verifying systems. He was simply walking through it. This thing that had been 42 years in the making. This answer that humanity had quietly prepared for what the galaxy kept asking the wrong way. He walked to the main viewport on the lower deck and looked out through the dark water at the nothing beyond it. Somewhere up there, across distances that took years to travel, the Galactic Council was having meetings. Revised assessments were being written. Assumptions were being reconsidered. Intelligence reports from 440 years of watching humanity were being pulled back out and looked at again, this time by people who understood that what they had seen was a fraction of what was there. And 40,000 people in the Kepler colonies were going to get their medicine. 200,000 people in 17 systems were going to stay in their homes. Ambassador Choi Hai-jin was going to walk out of Nexus Prime as the representative of a Tier 1 civilization, and no one in that station was going to give her 3 minutes and a contemptuous stare ever again. He put his hand on the cool surface of the viewport and stood there for a moment, in the deep dark under the water, in the silence of the ship that had changed what humanity was in the eyes of the galaxy. "Good work," he said very quietly, to the ship, to the people who built it, to the 42 years of careful, invisible, patient preparation that had made today possible. Then he turned and walked out into the light. Far away in the corridors of Nexus Prime, Ambassador Choi Hai-jin was packing her quarters for the last time. She moved slowly, carefully, the way she always did, nothing rushed, nothing careless. She folded her spare uniforms. She packed her personal logs. She picked up the small framed photograph from her desk, her family taken years ago, before her first posting, and wrapped it carefully and placed it at the top of the bag. She looked around the room one last time. 12 years. 12 years of 3-minute speaking slots and no votes and the word observer attached to everything she did. 12 years of being managed and dismissed and told that her species was not ready, not significant enough, not worth full consideration. 12 years of standing in that chamber alone and doing it anyway. She picked up her bag and walked to the door. The corridor outside was quiet. The security personnel had cleared out. The station was going about its normal business. Ships talking, meetings running, the endless machinery of galactic politics turning as it always had. But something in the texture of it was different. The officers she passed in the corridor looked at her flag and then looked away, not with contempt, with something closer to caution, with the look of people who had revised their thinking and were still adjusting to the new version. She walked through Nexus Prime with her head level, and her steps even, and the Earth flag bright on her shoulder. At the docking terminal, a transport was waiting to take her home. She boarded without looking back. Outside the station, in the deep black of space, the stars burned exactly as they always had, cold and white and old beyond any measure that human language had a word for. But the dark between them was different now. Humanity had spoken, the galaxy had listened, and nothing from this day forward would ever be the same.